Welcome to another episode of the Left Hook podcast. As always, I'm joined by James.
Howdy, Jordie. How you going?
I'm well, thank you. How about yourself?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. Although, upon doing some research for today's topic, one cannot help but get a little bit depressed.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, it's been a couple of weeks since we've talked about what's going on in Gaza, and we thought we would dedicate today's episode specifically and entirely to what's going on in Gaza because it's the issue of our time. So
Yes, I agree. And here at Left Hook Media, we try to give a pretty kind of even, balanced coverage to events not only in Australia but around the world. And this is a subject we have dedicated a lot of time and coverage to, purely because, as you said, it is the issue of our time. I think this will define politics in this period of time going into the future. It is incredibly decisive, and I think we will only really know the true ramifications of what is happening now when we analyse it like 10, 20 years in the future.
yeah, when historians actually write the history of this period in 20 years' time.
Yes. Yeah. So specifically, we are talking about the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. That the population there, not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well, and the wider Middle East, the populations are being subjected to at the whims of the genocidal regime of Israel, headed by Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yes.
So we've seen specifically not just the ongoing conflict and the escalation of violence, which I thought, how can you get more violence? How can you punish these people more? They seem to be doing it. They are breaking all expectations, all kind of international norms and regards for humanitarian law and general morality have just gone out the proverbial window. Pretty much, there's been I think for about almost 3 months now, a complete blockade of all food and medical supplies, essentially.
All aid has been blocked from the Strip.
Yeah, entering the Gaza Strip. So just for reference, before October 7th, to sustain the enclave, the population, which is estimated to be between 2 million and 2.5 million people, 500 trucks a day were entering Gaza.
I think half the population relied on outside aid.
And this amount of food as well, this amount of, shall we say, caloric sustenance, was calculated by the occupying Israeli government to provide the bare necessary caloric intake to prevent just full-on starvation. So already they were on just bare sustenance.
So as you said, the Israeli government has been weaponising aid and food for the better part of 2 decades now.
Absolutely.
But the level to what it's got now is it's horrific.
It is horrific. So there has been, like you said, for the last almost 3 months, no food, no aid entering Gaza. I have, as I'm sure you have, as I'm sure many members of our audience have witnessed pretty harrowing scenes of, men, women, children starving to death, emaciated bodies, and that's, massive lines of people clamouring to get basic necessities, just like, bits of bread, for example, and all that on top of the escalation of bombing, incursions, and military destruction.
Yeah, and it's important to note this is not by accident. This is an intended policy.
Yeah, it's all completely by design.
Yeah.
It is all completely by design, which logically leads you to the conclusion, or leads someone like myself to the conclusion, that the policy is not to exterminate Hamas or free the hostages, but to ethnically cleanse the entire population of the Gaza Strip. We'll get to that a bit later on.
Let's talk a little bit about the humanitarian blockade.
So there has been relief though, Jordie, because on Wednesday there was a partial lifting of this blockade, which saw a total of 5 aid trucks enter the Gaza Strip. Of those 5 aid trucks, 3 of them were carrying burial shrouds and 2 of them were carrying food aid. So just the really kind of sardonic sense of, I guess, humour that the Israelis, will enact. They'll say, here's 3 trucks worth of burial shrouds so you can bury all your dead. So since then, there's been, according to Israeli sources, a total of 107 aid trucks have been permitted in the last couple of days, again, compared to 500 trucks per day needed to sustain. And obviously we've seen these aid trucks are it's not just the military occupying forces on the checkpoints that are stopping these aid trucks getting in, but we've also seen footage of just normal Israelis protesting against letting aid in, which is, in my opinion, even worse because these are supposedly civilians.
Yeah.
But they are the ones that are equally as rabid and equally as frenzied in not allowing the aid in.
Yeah, Jeremy Lefao, the journalist in the Grey Zone, he spent some time with the settlers who had been blockading the aid and has some really good footage of the,
Which is, again, pretty intense. Someone like myself and someone like you, and I would assume 99% of the world's population is completely unconscionable. It's not something you would ever think of doing. And this comes as well, we've had, for example, recently, there was some quotes in the news saying that by various aid agencies saying that if aid was not allowed into Gaza, within 48 hours, you would be looking at about 14,000 children starving to death.
Yeah.
And I think this has kind of precipitated a bit of an outcry amongst the media generally.
Yeah.
Which has, again, precipitated this inflow, this very meagre inflow of aid.
Yeah.
So the general consensus of the population in Israel was summed up succinctly by an Israeli politician, Moshe Feiglin, when he stated on Wednesday that, I'm quoting him here, every child, every baby is the enemy. The enemy is not Hamas, nor is it the military wing of Hamas. Every child born in Gaza is the enemy. We need to occupy Gaza and settle it, and not a single Gazan child will be left there. There is no other victory. So, again, a perfectly normal statement from an Israeli politician.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, he's probably a centrist. He's probably a liberal centrist. Yeah. And that statement was actually in response to a ex-IDF chief of staff, Yair Golan, who accused the Israeli state of killing babies as a hobby.
Yep.
And he raised the point that, look, if we keep going on like this, we're on the way to becoming a pariah state like South Africa if we don't start behaving like a sane country.
And he was the former deputy chief of the Israeli Defense Force, I believe.
Yes, chief of staff, correct.
Correct. He said that no sane country would be doing this.
Yeah, exactly. So it just shows the mentality of the state of Israel at the moment.
Yeah, so in addition to the aid crisis as well, there is basically no health system as well. It's always been on the verge of collapse, but now it's gotten to the point that the World Health Organization has reported that it is on the brink of collapse. There is at least 95% of all hospitals in Gaza are damaged or destroyed. Only 19 of 36 hospitals remain function, although only partly. 4 major hospitals have closed in the last week due to attacks, evacuation orders, and increased bombardments. North Gaza has been stripped of nearly all its healthcare. The few remaining hospitals in the south are overwhelmed and are at imminent risk of shutting down.
When we say hospitals as well, we don't mean typically like what you'd think of here, where you have a massive multi-storey building with numerous different sectors for various different kind of medical fields. No, we're talking like
a generator and a tent.
Yeah, like large tents, medical beds, really old, old equipment, what can be salvaged. It truly is apocalyptic.
Yeah, what's really eye-opening as well is the stories from some of the doctors. So notably, there was a Australian doctor that went over that just came back recently and described the horrors he witnessed, and a British doctor who came back who's now in the UK, and he's actually been trying to show some of the photos and evidence to the British government of what's been happening. So he's actually taken photos of some of the children that have bullet wounds to their skulls, where the IDF have targeted them with snipers. Obviously just photos of kids completely maimed with no limbs and absolutely horrific scenes, but trying to show the British government, hey, like, look at what's going on. These children are being deliberately targeted.
Yeah. And why are we supporting them still?
Yeah. So he said actually under the previous government, the Tory government, they actually wanted to talk to him and see the photos, but under the current Labor government, under Keir Starmer, he cannot get a meeting at all with the Foreign Secretary.
That doesn't surprise me at all. Again, liberalism, the true face of fascism. Yeah. And yeah, it's funny because that same gentleman, I can't remember his name, but he also, I have seen the clips of him speaking to the parliamentary inquiry in the UK, and he was essentially saying, what would happen is you'd have a bomb would go off, it would blow up a house, it'd kill a dozen people, And then as other people were coming to help pull people out the rubble or help try to get other, the victims to safety or, just any survivors in that vicinity, they have quadcopter drones flying ahead, flying above, hovering above, and then just essentially picking off the survivors.
Yeah.
So again, don't even have the decency to do it, have a human, enact that murder. They need to do it with drones.
Yeah.
Very apocalyptic, very dystopian.
Yeah, so as we said, they are weaponising aid that's coming in, and I had a quote here from Dropsite News, and the quote is of the Israeli finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich.
Yeah, least sane Israeli
Potentially,
politician, yeah.
So he openly talked about the very purposeful intent to use humanitarian aid as a weapon to starve everyone in Gaza. He said, quote, "The aid that will enter Gaza in the coming days is the tiniest amount. A handful of bakeries that will hand out pita bread to people in public kitchens. People in Gaza will get a pita and a food plate, and that's it. Exactly what we are seeing in the videos, people standing in line and waiting to have someone serve them with some soup," said Smotrich. Furthermore, he went on to say that, truth be told, until the last of the hostages returns, we should also not let water into the Gaza Strip. But the reality is that if we do that, the world will force us to halt the war immediately and to lose. It would be winning the battle and losing the war. I'm committed to winning this war, Smotrich declared. We are disassembling Gaza and leaving it as a pile of rubble with total destruction, which has no precedent globally, and the world isn't stopping us.
Well, that's very succinct because he is saying it like it is. The world isn't stopping them. They are acting with complete impunity.
And this is what a lot of the academics, this is how they come into the conclusion that there is a genocide going on, is because there's clear intent from the Israeli political class. It is not just two podcasters sitting in the studio in South Australia saying this. We are literally reading out clear genocidal intent from the Israeli government. So make of that what you will.
And that sentiment is reflective of the broader sentiment in Israeli society. We're not all Israelis, but there's a large portion, which Bezalel Smotrich represents, that are completely happy with killing babies and wiping out the entire population.
And it's become so blatant now that the Western political class, even Australia now, has had to come out and condemn the actions. Yeah. So we should probably play this video here of David Lammy, who is the British Foreign Secretary for the Labour government.
Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. This weekend, the Israeli Defense Force started a new extensive ground operation throughout Gaza, Operation Gideon's Chariot. 5 Israeli divisions are now operating there. Prime Minister Netanyahu says that they're going to take control of the Strip, letting only minimal amounts of food reach Gazans. Madam Deputy Speaker, I quote Mr. Netanyahu. He says, "Just enough to prevent hunger." Fewer than 10 trucks entered Gaza yesterday. The UN and the World Health Organization have issued stark warnings of the threat of starvation hanging over hundreds of thousands of civilians. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is abominable. Civilians in Gaza facing starvation, homelessness, trauma, desperate for this war to end, now confront renewed bombardment, new displacement, and new suffering. And the remaining hostages, kept apart from their loved ones by Hamas for almost 600 days, are now at heightened risk from the war around them. Madam Deputy Speaker, 2 months ago, the ceasefire collapsed. Since then, the humanitarian catastrophe has rapidly intensified. For 11 weeks, Israeli forces have blockaded Gaza, leaving the World Food Programme without any remaining stocks. Israel has repeatedly struck hospitals, with 3 more hospitals in northern Gaza ceasing operations this weekend. Yet more aid workers and medical workers have been killed. After last year proved the deadliest year on record for humanitarian personnel. The diplomatic deadlock between Israel and Hamas has sadly also hardened. Despite the efforts of the United States, Qatar, and Egypt, which we of course support, no ceasefire has emerged. We repeat our demand that Hamas release all the hostages immediately and unconditionally, and reiterate that they cannot continue to run Gaza. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are now entering a dark new phase in this conflict.
Well, there you go.
There you go. I think, personally, David Lammy is a spineless sack of shit.
Yeah.
Purely because literally hours after this brave and heroic speech, they're still shipping weapons to the Israelis.
Yeah.
Where does Israel get their intelligence? Well, they have the RAF base on Cyprus that provides regular spy flights over the Gaza Strip to provide them with targeting information.
Yeah.
These people have been sitting there condoning this for the
Facilitating it.
not just condoning it, but directly facilitating.
Shipping spare parts for the fighter jets.
Yeah, spare parts, bullets,
intelligence,
logistical support. And now it's gotten to the stage where, oh no, I'm going to have to bring the Israeli ambassador in for a meeting. And it's like... Ooh,
and dangle the free trade agreement in front of his face.
do you think they care, dude?
Yeah.
Like, it is so disgusting. You have all this hand-wringing from these milquetoast kind of European liberals going, oh no, what they're doing is horrible, yet not actually doing anything about it. And they are not going to do anything about it. All these people... I'm not going to say what I was about to say, actually.
We'll leave it at that.
We'll leave it at that. But all these people are absolutely disgusting. And it is funny. Well, I think one of the things, when you talk about this quickly, one of the events that has precipitated, because we've seen this obviously in the UK, we've also seen like France and Canada and stuff have come out and they've had like a joint statement where they're saying, oh, we condemn what Israel's doing, but we also condemn Hamas and we need to free the hostages, the standard bullshit, pardon my language. But I think Israel has committed the cardinal sin in the eyes of the European Atlanticist elites, and that is firing upon white people.
Yes. Yes.
Recently there was a delegation...
this is in the West Bank?
This is in the West Bank, yep. So this was a diplomats on a tour of Jenin at the behest of the Palestinian Authority.
Yep.
Representatives from the UK, EU, France, Italy, Canada, Russia, China, Japan.
Yep.
I think there were a couple other countries as well. And they were fired upon, supposedly warning shots by an IDF soldier. And this has caused outrage, with many of these countries that got, reasonably enough, saying, well, you can't fire on our diplomats.
Yeah.
The IDF has come out and said, oh, they were, there was a zone that they were permitted to walk in and they stepped outside of that zone, rada.
Yeah.
And the IDF has come out and said, yeah, we'll investigate, rada, and we'll see what happens from there. But I think that is one of the reasons, because you can kill as many Arabs as you want, you can kill as many black and brown people as you want, but as soon as you fire on white people, that is a big no-no. Vladimir Putin actually has committed the same cardinal sin by killing Ukrainians, and that is why they're so outraged.
You have to, they've crossed the line there. They really have, by firing on the Japanese delegation.
Yes.
And so in Japan, they actually pulled the Israeli ambassador up into parliament and gave him a very stern warning and drumming down.
Well, as they should. And I think it's interesting because especially in China, I mean, the Chinese public are not fans of Israel. And China's pretty much been one of the only countries actually trying to offer concrete solutions. And they're not a direct regional actor, but it does affect them as it affects the entire world. But yeah, in South Korea and Japan, there are massive public protests about this, as there are around the rest of the world. I mean, I think London last weekend, 500,000 people marched in protest, which is unprecedented and really good to see the solidarity. And I think this is why the pressure is starting to get to some of the leadership in Europe. But at the end of the day, kind of these ideologically incoherent speeches by David Lammy and, for example, the Spanish government not buying bullets from Israeli weapons firms isn't going to change anything.
No,
these
definitely
are
not.
fundamentally the reason they are doing these and enacting these things, these measures, is because they're not effectual.
Yeah.
They're entirely ineffectual.
Yeah.
They're rhetorical.
Yeah.
And they can provide a little political win. And as well, it's these people, I think, trying to wipe their hands of the bloodshed that they have had their part in sustaining.
Yeah.
Because I think they know the world is not going to look kindly on them.
Yeah. So as David Lammy mentioned, they have launched Gideon's Chariot.
Yes, chariots, plural.
Chariots. Sorry, last Monday.
Yeah.
Which is, I find ironic that these attacks, these onslaughts, always have these really biblical names.
Yes, yeah, they do. Israeli naming convention is hilarious, isn't it?
It is. So I believe Gideon was a biblical figure.
Yeah.
He was a warrior, philosopher, judge or something,
Judge,
wasn't he?
yeah, king. So he... it's quite funny. Again, neither of us are biblical scholars.
No.
Who would have thought it? But Gideon, one, he didn't have chariots.
Yep.
And he led the Jewish population, the Israelites, against the destruction of the Midianites.
Yeah, and the Amalek as well.
And the
I believe.
Amalek,
Yeah.
yes. And it's framed in kind of the historical... kind of folkloric retelling as being like a classic underdog story.
Yeah, that's right.
Because Gideon and the Israelites and their forces were, decisively outnumbered, but they pulled off this surprise win. Which is hilarious because the Israeli army is one of like the best armed militaries in the world, with all the other major military powers in the Western world supporting them militarily, economically, and they're sitting there beating up a stateless population with no formal army, air force, or navy.
Yep.
A true underdog story.
So I was just going to add, this operation and the weaponization of humanitarian aid has forced some of the Australian political class to come out and condemn it as well. So we've had Penny Wong come out and she said that...
Is she concerned? Sorry?
She's always concerned.
She's always concerned about
Penny
the
Wong
situation.
is always concerned.
Yeah.
That is one thing you can be sure of. She has said that Australia has committed more than $100 million in humanitarian assistance to support civilians in Gaza and Lebanon, too much of which Israel has prevented from reaching vulnerable people. Our humanitarian partners have confirmed that they stand ready to provide immediate and life-saving assistance to the people of Gaza. She went on to say that we condemn the abhorrent and outrageous comments made by members of Netanyahu's government about the people in crisis. We have consistently opposed the expansion of military operations by Israel in Gaza, just as we have been clear that the forced displacement of Palestinians from Gaza would breach international law. So, great, good on you, Penny Wong. Very strong condemnation. I say that with a heavy layer of sarcasm.
Yes.
And the Greens went on to put on further pressure on Netanyahu and his extremist government to end the genocide. Our government can do this by sanctioning Netanyahu and his extremist government, ending two-way arms trade, and recognising a state of Palestine. Obviously, some more...
I believe we do already recognise Palestine as a state on the 1967 borders.
Okay.
I think that's the internationally kind of recognised consensus.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the whole issue, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And then so that was the Greens.
Yeah.
The Liberal frontbencher, James Paterson, said that there should absolutely be a free flow of aid, but said that the Palestinian militant group Hamas was responsible for this situation. I do think aid should be allowed to enter Gaza. No question about that. We do want to see innocent people, especially innocent children, suffering as a result of this war. But as I've said before, and it is really important to continue and emphasise, Hamas has responsibility here, James Paterson told the ABC last Wednesday. He went on to say Hamas can make choices too, and they can make sure that those babies received the aid they need by releasing those hostages. This is the obstacle to peace, and how they could remove it tomorrow is their choice. So it's no surprise that the Liberal Party and James Paterson are blaming Hamas for the ongoing humanitarian aid. And obviously children starving as a result of having no food is purely the fault of the militant organisation.
Of Hamas, correct.
So, yeah, these statements kind of show that there hasn't been, in my opinion, a major shift really from any of the major parties. The Labor Party sit there and obviously say, we condemn their actions, etc., etc. They have to abide by international law. The Greens a little bit stronger. They say that Netanyahu obviously is a war criminal, in my opinion.
Objectively,
there's not much doubt about that. And said that we should stop two-way trade and recognise the state of Palestine. And then the Liberal Party obviously just blame Hamas.
Pretty standard. That's pretty much what I'd expect from the Australian political... the kind of the whole spectrum there.
Yep.
Interesting to note, obviously, that Israel has broken every single ceasefire. Mm-hmm. Hamas has actually come out and said that, hey, look, we don't want to govern the Gaza Strip anymore. We don't want this to keep going. We're willing to, obviously, work with you guys to negotiate to release hostages. We don't want to be in the power of governance, but if we are not here as the main political force and military force in what remains of the Gaza Strip, then who's going to stop you just rolling through?
Yeah.
Literally bulldozing the population out of their homes and ethnically cleansing them. No one will.
Yeah.
So that's why I think Hamas has a moral obligation to remain. Important to note as well that when there was direct talks between the United States and Hamas to release the American-Israeli hostage, or I guess you can call them POWs, hostages, whatever you call them, Edan Alexander, I believe
this was last week he was released.
Last week. What I have read and heard is that the agreement that was come to between the Americans and Hamas directly, bypassing Israel, was that we will allow this man to be released if you allow aid in.
Yes.
To which the Americans said, no worries.
Yeah.
We will allow the aid in. As we've seen, nothing has really changed since then. So neither of the Israelis or the Americans or any of the Europeans or the British are acting in good faith.
Yeah.
And I think Hamas do realise that. I think the Palestinians do realise that.
Yeah. While we're speaking of the Americans and aid,
Yes.
there has also been a bit of a shift now as what's happening with the aid distribution is that it's now being privatised, and there is a US private firm that is coming in now because it's gotten to the point now where the UN just has become so timid, and you can't really blame them. They've lost hundreds of volunteers and UN staff.
Yeah.
So now the entire process has been privatised. There's a US contractor moving in to do it.
Yep.
And
whether they're actually distributing aid or not is another matter.
Yes.
As again, when there's a private military contractor involved, again, part of that kind of neoliberal privatisation of basic humanitarian functions that the US and the Israelis are really good at. Again, I think they've been deployed to like 2 checkpoints.
Yeah. And
why aren't they deployed to all the checkpoints?
Yeah.
Pardon me, to allow aid? I don't know. Maybe they're doing other stuff.
And
we may never know.
Yeah, from my understanding from my readings as well, is that these aid checkpoints will be used to kind of herd the remaining population into certain areas where they will just keep them alive with very small amounts of food. And Antonio Guterres, the UN Security General, has come out and even said that this is a system of controlling and callously limiting aid down to the last calorie and grain of flour.
Exactly. He's hit the nail on the head, because what this will end up doing will be this will have the effect of drawing the remaining population into certain centres where their freedom of movement will be limited. They'll essentially be in like a ghetto. Like that, they will be ghettoized in these kind of makeshift little tent settlements, and then their vacant homes and land that they previously occupied will be occupied by the Israelis, divided up, and then bulldozed and settled eventually.
Yeah.
This is part of the wider strategy at play.
Yeah, definitely. And I thought it would be worth noting, that while this happened last Thursday, there was the shooting outside of the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., United States. there was 2 Israeli embassy staff were killed.
Tragic, horrible.
By an American gunman who afterwards shouted out some, I think, free Palestine.
Oh, this is for Gaza,
Yes.
I believe, as
Yep.
arresting him. Elias Rodriguez, I believe his name
Yeah,
was.
so it's, I guess, worth noting that this came during the Operation Gideon's Chariot and the weaponization of humanitarian aid.
Yeah.
So, to no surprise, obviously the Western media completely shifted its attention. In the Advertiser on Friday morning, there was a double-page spread of the embassy shooting. You had to go to page 15, and there was a tiny little column on the left-hand side talking about the ongoing starvation and the military operation in Gaza.
Obviously, again, as we've discussed, we've made it very clear, white lives matter more than brown lives. So you can kill 50 to 100 Palestinians in a night, indiscriminately, but when 2 Jewish people are targeted in the United States, then that serves its purpose. Again, I'm not going to say it was a false flag or be conspiratorial or anything about that, but these events act as a perfect sinkhole to essentially, so if you search Israel on Google, that'll be the first thing that comes up.
It is really unfortunate.
It is super unfortunate, but as well, it shows, this is another one of those things that demonstrates how out of control and widespread the consequences of this are.
Yeah.
And you're having people getting killed in the United States. You're having political violence and tension erupt all over the world because this situation keeps perpetuating. And it will keep perpetuating, unfortunately.
And after this shooting in Washington, the Israel Foreign Minister, Gideon Sa'ar, came out and accused the European officials of toxic anti-Semitic incitement, referring to the condemnation from the Europeans last week against Israel. He blamed their condemnation for the fatal shooting of the 2 Israeli embassy staff. And so, there's obviously that just cognitive dissonance. They can't understand that their actions are what's causing this violence, not the condemnation of countries against Israel.
Yes, correct. Yeah, so it's no, they hate us because we are Jewish.
Yes.
These are acts of anti-Semitism, and it has nothing to do with the large-scale slaughter and ethnic cleansing that we are enacting on an indigenous population in the Middle East.
Yes.
Don't look there. Nothing to do with that.
He said there is a direct line connecting anti-Semitic and anti-Israel incitement to this murder.
Well, he said it.
He has the smoking gun.
He said it.
Look, that's obviously it's obviously horrible. What we're talking about right now is quite it's very difficult to comprehend and kind of talk about. It really bogs you down. However, I thought we should probably try and end the segment on a more positive note.
Yeah.
Because there has been a shift, in my personal opinion, against Israel from some of its former supporters and champions, most notably Piers Morgan.
Yes, supposedly, yeah.
So I don't know if you saw this, but last week on the Piers Morgan show,
Mehdi Hassan.
He had on Mehdi Hassan and a US Major John Spencer to debate what's going on, and it was quite enlightening, I thought, to hear what Piers Morgan had to say.
The bombardment is wholly disproportionate. The civilian death toll and suffering is intolerable. The denial of aid is unacceptable. These are not the words of democratic leaders about Putin's war on Ukraine, but those of the UK, France and Canada about Israel's ongoing offensive in Gaza. President Trump now says it's time for Netanyahu to wrap it up. Israel is allowing some aid to trickle into Gaza after an 11-week blockade, but aid workers say it's a drop in the ocean, and the US president has acknowledged that a lot of people in Gaza are starving. Shamefully, Hamas still holds 58 hostages and is watching the total destruction of Gaza and its people because it doesn't want peace and it doesn't value human life. It's increasingly difficult to argue that the exact same statement doesn't apply to Netanyahu's Israeli government. Israel's war on Hamas was not a genocide, but genocide isn't something that happens with the push of a button. A justified war can end with atrocities that stain humanity, as many have through history. So who is going to stop this one before it does, if it hasn't already? Well, joining me now is Mehdi Hassan, the Editor-in-Chief and CEO of Zatea, and retired Major John Spencer, Chair of Urban Warfare Studies at the Modern War Institute. Okay, let's get into this. Mehdi, welcome back to Uncensored. Listen, you and I have talked about this war in Gaza for ever since it started, this phase of the 75-year conflict. And I have resisted going as far as you have done in your criticism of the Israeli government. I resist no more. I think we've reached common ground about what we view is happening and has been happening through this period of this blockade, which frankly is just starvation of the people there, including so many innocent young women and children. And I think that the incessant bombing and killing, and we don't know how many civilians have been killed, but it is on a daily basis. It looks like hundreds of people every day, with no apparent attempt, it seems to me, to have any real plan for how this ends or what happens when it ends, other than if you look at what Smotrich has been saying, probably the most right-wing member of a very right-wing government, he is talking in a genocidal language about kicking all the Palestinians out. So I think you and I have reached a place in the last few weeks where we are in agreement. But my question for you, Mehdi, is how does this end?
I don't know the answer to that question, Piers, and I'm glad we're in agreement. I wish we weren't. Actually, I wish I had been wrong and you were right. I wish that a year ago when I said on your show, you said, well, if it's not about the hostages, what's it about? And I said, it's about depopulating Gaza. It's about conquering Gaza. I wish I'd been wrong. But as you said, Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister in the Israeli government, said this week, we are there to conquer, cleanse, and remain. Those are his words. We are disassembling Gaza, he said. We are leaving it as piles of rubble. He says, we're doing something that no one's done in the world before. He bragged out loud, and he said, yes, the Gazans will have to leave. So all of those things are stuff some of us were saying last year. I wish we hadn't been vindicated in this horrific way. The killing is ongoing. The starvation is ongoing. And look, I do hope that a dam is bursting. You mentioned the genocide word. Shmuel Lederman, who is an Israeli researcher of genocide, spent much of 2024 saying it's not a genocide, it's not a genocide. He was interviewed by a Dutch newspaper last week. He said, I've changed my position. It is a genocide. He said, in my field, there's a consensus among genocide scholars that it's a genocide. In fact, that Dutch newspaper interviewed 7 leading scholars of genocide. Every single one said, we think what's happening in Gaza is a genocide.
Well, no, good on you, Pierce. As a former Murdoch journalist and close friend of Jeffrey Epstein, I congratulate you for finally seeing the light.
Yeah, exactly. No, good on it, man. It's good. So we are, again, this is reflective of what we're starting to see in the Western media.
Yeah.
Obviously, you still have people like that retired Major John Spencer, who is no doubt of the belief that Israel has not killed a single child.
Yep.
And is not responsible for any deaths. But again, the consensus seems to be shifting. And as you're about to play for us, this is also present. There is a strain of Israeli society in Israeli politics that is also not afraid to speak out against what is happening.
Yeah, so the slaughter has become so bad that now there is a shift inside the Israeli parliament to condemn Netanyahu and the war.
When we say shift, we mean one man speaking up.
One man standing up in the Knesset, and I will have to translate this because it is in Hebrew. The other thing I want to say, you don't know how I see you weak. You are weak people, very, very weak. After a year and a half of a war in which you killed 19,000 children, 53,000 residents, you destroyed all the universities and the hospitals, and for you there is no political win. You feel there is no political win. That's why you go crazy. Why are you going crazy? Why are you weak? Why are you sad? Why are you not happy? Why? Because there is no political win. And then he is dragged away by security guards.
Yes, so this is actually the second time I believe that man is ethnically Palestinian. I've played another clip in the past, one time when we had glorious friend of the show, Habiba Jaguri, filling in for you.
Yep.
And we played, and his sentiment was pretty similar. He was just accusing them of being genocidaires, essentially, and he was also accosted by the rest of the Knesset and escorted out by security guards.
Yeah.
Same outcome.
It's quite eye-opening that all the politicians and MPs there just start screaming at him like he is,
Yeah, it looked like they're about to rip him apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's pretty crazy. So there is that sentiment there in Israel, and there are, despite widespread public sentiment, there are Israelis that are disgusted.
Yeah,
by
definitely.
this, like all political situations. You can't. Not the entire society is not cut from the same cloth, obviously. But important to note that again we're seeing the erasure of a people, of a population, and it's not just the destruction of their homes. It's not just the destruction of their bodies. It's also the destruction of the basic infrastructure to sustain life. Is the destruction of their places of worship, the destruction of their schools, their libraries, their cemeteries, all the concrete things that would indicate that a population has lived and thrived in a certain area are being wiped out. This is the attempt by Israel to erase the identity of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Unfortunately, they are succeeding. And the Western world, as we've kind of pointed to, we're all sitting back and just maybe wringing our hands with concern, like Penny Wong, with feigned outrage like David Lammy, but they're not doing anything concrete.
No, and I think we are, as you said, we're a bit of a crossroad here where I think the Israeli military will go in and occupy and annex the Strip. They will, as I said, herd the remaining Gazans into a very small section and then try and export them off to other countries. Yeah,
there was a report about possibly taking 1 million of them to Libya. Which is insane. Libya already has a refugee crisis. It's a barely functioning country after the US-Israeli NATO toppling of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, which turned a stable, relatively prosperous middle-income country into an absolute basket case, of which 14 years later there is still no defined government or functioning state. Before we finish, I did want to briefly touch on a few things.
Yes.
So obviously, this is not just affecting the Western, kind of political sphere. It's not just affecting the Palestinians. We've also had escalation. For example, Israel is still bombing Lebanon. So they've violated the ceasefire with Hezbollah over 3,000 times. To very minimal resistance, both from Hezbollah and from the formal Lebanese government. And while we ironically reported, on the possible end to the bromance between Trump and Bibi, it appears that we have both been vindicated, Jordie, as nothing has fundamentally changed. The rhetoric has dovetailed even more. And we are recently, this is current, we're seeing the collapse in the ongoing US-Iran negotiations. Which I think they're entering the 5th round of talks today in Oman. With Oman as the mediator. The last 4 rounds were cited by both sides as being productive, which is good. However, Steve Witkoff, chief negotiator, has come out and stated in no uncertain terms that Iran is not allowed to have any enrichment of uranium, even for civilian use, which is a position that Iran has repeatedly stated they would never agree to. So working towards progress and then essentially just backpedaling and cutting the negotiations off at the knees. So I personally think there was never any sincerity for a new negotiated nuclear deal with Iran, and I think the entire process has been deliberately strung out as long as possible to leave Iran in a position of political stasis, so effectively using their willingness to act in good faith to halt any further kind of geopolitical positioning in the region in order for them to not combat Israel in the same way. So there was a new intelligence report 3 days ago, that Israel was making preparations to strike Iranian nuclear facilities if the talks break down. And given the recent statements from Witkoff, it appears that they are being engineered towards such an outcome, a deliberate breakdown. So we have to remember Israel can't do anything without the US, militarily, without their US direct support. So I actually do think this story was dropped in an attempt by maybe some of the less insane actors of the US defense/intelligence community to try and gauge the reaction, possibly sway American political leadership away from supporting that idea. I think the Iranians seem to recognise this. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said, pardon my pronunciation, that if any Israeli strikes are committed against Iran and their facilities, he will hold the US responsible. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps said that if this was undertaken, Israel would receive a devastating and decisive response. So, just to wrap up, I think that the Israelis know this, and they're relying on possibly more ignorant actors in the United States to essentially give them the go-ahead. Because the way I see the situation is that Israel cannot go backwards. Their society is too fractured. Their polity, like their political body, is too fractured.
Yeah.
The only way that they can come out and survive is to keep going forwards.
Yeah, keep the war going.
Keep the war going. Yep. And the next logical step is the escalation with Iran, which would be absolutely devastating, not just for Israel, not just for the entire region, but for the entire world.
Yeah.
While this result would be absolute chaos, the outcome would be productive because it would allow Benjamin Netanyahu's political career and political project to continue. So the longer the crisis goes on, the more violence and death and destruction will be incurred, the longer the conflict will be able to be perpetuated, so Bibi's influence will remain and continue to grow. So this leaves me with a rhetorical question for the audience and for you and for myself to ponder. How far does it go? How far do we let it go? And do we essentially sacrifice every single value that we state that we have as a kind of Western liberal democracy and all the legitimacy that Europe and America, which isn't much anymore amongst the global South countries, still has? Do we sacrifice that all on the altar of Netanyahu and US imperial hegemony in the region?
Well, to wrap it up, let me put my realpolitik glasses on for a moment. Yeah. I think that unless Israel collapses under the strain of its own contradictions, which I don't see happening anytime soon.
I think provided the conflict can keep going.
Provided the conflict can keep going, which it seems that it is likely to.
Yep.
I think it'll take the United States to come in and broker a forced peace agreement, actually sit Netanyahu down in the Israeli government and say, look, this is enough. The war is going to end. So I think it will take that because it seems that neither side, the Palestinian resistant groups, are going to put down their arms, and it doesn't seem that Netanyahu is going to finish the war because Netanyahu has insisted that he will not make any agreement that ends the war without the total elimination of Hamas and the demilitarization of the entire Gaza Strip. And Hamas has said that it will not release any more Israeli captives held in Gaza unless an internationally certified deal is reached that includes the total withdrawal of Israel forces and a long-term truce. So I think unless the US sit down and force that truce, unfortunately, I think we're going to continue witnessing the horrors coming out of Gaza.
That's horrible. It truly is horrible. It truly is. It's just such a morass, such a failure on every single side of everything that we hold dear.
It does, and it shows the shortcomings, unfortunately, of institutional liberalism and international law, even though they are ideals, I think, that are good and we should uphold. When push comes to shove, unfortunately,
it's kind of toothless, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
what is the saying? That the powerful do what they can and the weak must suffer what they must.
Very succinct. And I think that perfectly encapsulates our segment and analysis on the ongoing situation in Gaza.
Thanks for listening. We hope it was informative.
Yeah.
And please like and subscribe. We will see you next week.
Yeah, I was going to say, hit that subscribe button like a 2,000-pound Israeli bomb hits a hospital. Ciao.
See you later.